All right, so in this last mini conversation, we're going to troubleshoot muscle gain. So, when it comes to fat loss, that's kind of considered an independent lever from muscle gain. Everyone at this stage of life needs to concern themselves with gaining muscle because we're losing it with age. Excuse me. And in order to combat age-related muscle loss, we need to put in all of our efforts towards gaining or maintaining what we have so we don't suffer the health consequences down the road. And of course, I did make mention of the fact that this is interrelated with the story of fat loss because the more muscle you lose, the more likely you are to gain fat. So it is working towards your fat loss goals to maintain muscle mass. And that's simply, again, because of the fact that muscle is a metabolically active tissue. It uses a lot of energy. The less you have, the less energy you need, the more likely you are to overshoot your energy needs in your diet. But of course, more to the fact, people who have low muscle mass tend to be more insulin resistant with age because muscles are your primary insulin sensitizers. You want to keep that system working because insulin is what regulates your ability to take nutrients in and utilize them to generate energy and not just have it stuck in a fat storage compartment. Okay, so you need that muscle. So now let's say you're someone who's been applying themselves with what you think is a great amount of effort and consistency to your weight training. Well, the reality is this is a lot simpler to like as far as troubleshooting than fat loss because there are fewer dials. Here, it's a question of, are you training enough and are you eating enough? Okay, so training enough. Stressing the muscle is important for it to want to grow. And the stress on the muscle comes from the appropriate level of stress exposure in terms of frequency. So if you're someone who works out, for example, once a week and occasionally twice a week, and you're not seeing any changes over several months in your muscle mass, then you might say, well, I'm going to have to work on moving more consistently and without missing to 2 times a week. That's step one, is the amount of training you're doing. Now, if you're someone who has been consistently lifting for 2 times a week, the next thing to ask yourself in terms of sufficient stress on the muscle is, are you pushing hard enough during those sessions? Now, you may be someone short on time. The sessions may be 20 minutes. And if you've been listening to my messaging, 20 minutes is better than 0 minutes, and you should always do it. Whether or not it's sufficient may not be the question for you right now. It's the most you can do. Sometimes just getting in 2 times a week for 20 minutes is the stepping stone for doing more. The only way to get to the more is to keep where you are long enough that that becomes easy, and then you can move to the next level. Unfortunately, what I see people doing is they can't do the full workout. They say, what's the point? And they do nothing. That's really just standing still when you could be making small, steady progress forward. Any progress is better than no progress. So, while you're hearing this message, you might be discouraged, but I wouldn't discourage you. I would say that any movement is some progress. So work on 2 sessions a week consistently without missing, barring illness, and injury. But even with injury, reach out because I can modify your training or suggest workarounds so that you can keep going. The second thing is, once you've got the frequency dialed in, try and work on getting full workouts as step 2. When the workouts have been full, ask yourself whether you're actually pushing enough weight. Like, are you pushing weights more and more over the weeks, or do you tend to sit where you are and repeat the same workout week after week with the same weights? It's not always possible to push the weights, but often it is. So the other thing is following the programs, is introducing the novelty that the muscle needs. So it's built into the very structure of the Women Who Want Muscle sequence to add the amount of stress gradually to the muscles that will enable growth. And anyone who's been in the program long enough has seen that because they're gaining muscle by virtue of progressing through the programs. The only way to progress through programs is to start at the beginning and work your way through life to allow you to become a habitual lifter first, and second, to learn how to push yourself sufficiently and see that progression. Commit to training is the short story here. The other part of the equation is dietary protein. So occasionally, very rarely is this really the missing piece. So few of us have so little protein intake that we cannot build muscle in the face of good training. But if you are doing everything with training and you're still not gaining muscle, this could be the explanation. So you want to very much dial in your dietary protein. More can help. This can be the limiting factor in someone who's already quite slender. So there are some of you in the program who I think probably are accustomed to eating quite little and not accustomed to the kind of increases in diet that are total calories included that are necessary to gain muscle. So if you're someone who is fairly slender, maybe you think your body fat is high, but in reality, what's happening is it just needs to be that your muscle mass is higher. And you actually have to eat more to get the composition you want. So you have to recognize if you're in the category of people whose body fat percentage is probably okay and not a health risk, and maybe even bump your intake a little bit more. If you're not sure, obviously reach out because we can talk one-on-one, but this is where, reviewing your dietary habits along with getting a DEXA scan can help. So that's a really short story, but that's the bottom line there. Sufficient stress on the muscle. Again, if you're not getting the results you want, training hard 2 days a week, you go to 3 days a week. And that tipping point of how much you want to push the muscle gain versus how much you feel you have the bandwidth to do, given your current life circumstances, your energy levels, and competing demands on your time, is completely up to you. At the end of the day, you can't then get upset with the result of what you can realistically do. And so this is a conversation of trade-offs, right? So looking at someone else's result and wanting that result without putting in the same amount of training is not being realistic or honest. And it's not compassionate, right? Because you're working within your reality, and that's okay. But coming to terms with what that reality is super important, because that's the only way you're going to make progress. And sometimes just more time is needed. So keep your efforts up, and I hope you found this a useful conversation.